A man can run from his past for 20 years. He can change his name, change his profession, change the entire direction of his life. He can ride until the sun burns the memories from his skin and the wind scours the ghosts from his soul. But some ghosts learn to ride too. For Marcus Cole, the ghost arrived on a Tuesday, carried by a tired horse and a dust-covered mail carrier. It was a single letter, the paper worn soft, the ink slightly blurred. He'd been branding cattle in a dusty Kansas paddock, the smell of burnt hair and hot iron thick in the air. Now he sat on the steps of his small bunkhouse, the setting sun painting the prairie in shades of blood and fire, and unfolded the ghost. The handwriting was Rebecca's, flowing, urgent, just like the woman herself. My dearest Marcus, I pray this letter finds you. I am with child, your child, and in desperate need. The words hit him harder than any fist. Your child. 6 months had passed since their few nights together in Abilene. A wagon train passing through, a lonely cattleman between drives, two souls finding a temporary cure for the ache of solitude. Nothing meant to last, or so he'd thought. He kept reading, his calloused fingers trembling just slightly. I found myself in a situation most dire, in a place called Willow Creek, Wyoming Territory. There are others here who need help as well. Please come quickly. Time grows short. With love and hope, Rebecca. He read it again. And again. The simple words formed a knot in his gut, a cold, hard certainty. This wasn't a choice. It was a reckoning. 20 years ago, he'd stood by helpless as his own mother withered away, his father having vanished into the winter snows, with a promise to return that was as empty as the house he left behind. Marcus had been a boy of 12 then. He was 42 now, a former army surgeon who'd traded his scalpel for a branding iron, trying to outrun the memory of too much death. He looked up at the vast, indifferent sky. I won't make that mistake again, Ma, he whispered to the wind. He didn't know it then, sitting there with that ghost in his hand. But he wasn't just riding toward a woman and a child. He was riding toward a darkness so deep and twisted it would make the battlefields of Gettysburg look like a Sunday picnic. He thought he was going to save her. He had no idea that she was the one trying to save him. And he had no idea that in Willow Creek, Wyoming, the dead don't always stay dead. And the living, well, the living wish they were. The ride north was 3 weeks of hard miles and harder memories. Every river he crossed, every mountain range he saw on the horizon, felt like a step further away from the man he'd tried to be, and a step closer to the man he'd been born from. His father, Thomas Cole, a man who walked away. Marcus pushed the thought down. He wasn't his father. He was here to prove it. Willow Creek appeared out of the high plains like a mirage, a dusty main street, a handful of weathered wooden buildings, and a silence that felt wrong. It was the middle of the afternoon, but the town was dead. Windows were shuttered. The few people he saw scurried from one building to another, heads down, refusing to meet his gaze. This wasn't a town. It was a place holding its breath. He tied his horse outside the general store and stepped inside, the jangle of the bell above the door sounding like a gunshot in the quiet. The shopkeeper, a rail-thin man with eyes that darted like frightened birds, looked up from his counter. "Help you?" the man whispered, his gaze flickering to the door Marcus had just entered. "Looking for a woman," Marcus said, his voice feeling too loud in the stillness. "Rebecca Patterson. She wrote me from this town." The shopkeeper went pale, not just a little pale, the kind of pale you see on a corpse. He wiped his sweaty hands on his apron, his eyes darting to the door again. "Never heard of her?" he said too quickly. "Been here 10 years. Know everyone. No Rebecca Patterson here." It was a lie, a bad one. Marcus could smell it, sour and sharp like curdled milk. He pulled out the letter, smoothing it on the counter. "The address is right here. Willow Creek, Wyoming Territory." The shopkeeper wouldn't even look at it. "Lots of Willow Creeks, I reckon." Marcus felt the cold knot in his stomach tighten. He went to the saloon, the blacksmith, the small hotel. The story was the same. No one knew her. No one had seen her. No one remembered a pregnant woman arriving in town. It was like she had never existed. By sunset, his last hope was the small white church at the end of the street. Its paint was fresh, its windows clean, a beacon of order in a town drowning in secrets. The door opened and a man with silver hair and kind eyes stepped out. "Evening, stranger," the man said. "I'm Reverend Jenkins. Saw you asking around." "Marcus Cole." Marcus extended a hand. "I'm looking for Rebecca Patterson." The Reverend's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. A flash of fear? He shook Marcus's hand. "Can't say that I do, but it's a cold evening. Come in for some coffee. My wife has just made a fresh pot." Inside, the church was simple, clean. The Reverend's wife, a small, nervous woman named Martha, poured 3 cups of coffee. They talked about the weather, cattle prices, the railroad, anything but Rebecca. Marcus felt like he was in a play where everyone knew their lines but him. The unspoken tension was so thick he could have cut it with his knife. Finally, the Reverend excused himself to prepare for evening prayers. As Mrs. Jenkins walked Marcus to the door, she glanced back, making sure they were alone. She leaned in close, her voice a frantic whisper. "The town, it's not what it seems, Mr. Cole." "What is it, Mrs. Jenkins? Where is Rebecca?" Her eyes darted around the empty street. "Old man Hayes's place, up in the hills. He provides a service for the town." "What kind of service?" She wouldn't meet his eyes. "Sometimes we hear things from up there. Crying. Sounds a woman makes when she's in pain." She pressed a small folded piece of paper into his hand. It was a crudely drawn map. "Follow the creek north to the lightning split pine, then head east. But be careful. Jeremiah Hayes doesn't take kindly to visitors." "What kind of man is he?" Marcus asked, the cold knot in his stomach now a block of ice. Mrs. Jenkins's face hardened. "He's the devil, Mr. Cole. The devil himself come to Wyoming. And he's not alone." She clutched his arm, her knuckles white. "If you find her, don't bring her back here. This town isn't a sanctuary, it's his hunting ground. And we're all just prey." Before he could ask more, the Reverend returned. Mrs. Jenkins's face instantly smoothed into a placid mask. "Godspeed, Mr. Cole," she said, her voice now loud and clear. As Marcus walked back to his horse, the map burning in his palm, he realized the terrifying truth. The people of Willow Creek weren't just lying about Rebecca. They were protecting the man who had taken her. The entire town was a cage, and he was about to go rattle the bars. He didn't know the bars were just the beginning. The real horror was the man who held the key. A man he'd met once before, on a night filled with cannon fire and the screams of dying men. A man he had saved. And that was a mistake he was about to pay for. In blood. The trail up the mountain was a twisted spine of rock and shadow. Marcus followed the map, the sound of the creek his only companion as the sun bled out behind the peaks. He found the lightning-split pine, a skeletal giant clawing at the sky, and turned east. The air grew thinner, colder. The feeling of being watched was so intense, the hairs on his arms stood on end. He tethered his horse well back from the clearing and crept forward on foot. The cabin was larger than he'd expected, solidly built, with a curl of smoke rising from a stone chimney. It looked normal, a homesteader's cabin. But through the window he saw him, a mountain of a man built like a grizzly bear, hunched over a table. His back was to the window, but the sheer size of him was intimidating. This had to be Jeremiah Hayes. Then he heard it, a faint sound, almost lost on the wind. A woman's sob. It came from a smaller building next to the cabin, a windowless shed with a heavy padlocked door. Marcus moved like a ghost, pressing his ear to the rough-hewn logs. Inside, he could hear whispers, frightened whispers. "He's coming back soon," one voice said. "Hush, Anna," another replied. "Pray he doesn't." These weren't guests. They were prisoners. Marcus moved to a small gap between the logs. "Hello?" he called softly. "My name is Marcus. I'm not here to hurt you." Silence. Then a voice, trembling but defiant. "Who are you? What do you want?" "I'm looking for a woman named Rebecca Patterson." A long, painful pause stretched out. Then a younger voice, choked with grief, delivered the blow. "Rebecca? Rebecca died 3 months ago. Her and the baby both. The world tilted. The air rushed from his lungs. Dead. She was dead before the letter even reached him. The ink on the page was a ghost's final prayer. Grief and a white-hot rage warred inside him. "What happened to her?" he managed to choke out. "She fought back," the first voice said. "Jeremiah, he doesn't like it when they fight back. He buried them up on the ridge." He closed his eyes, the image searing itself into his mind. "How many of you are there?" "4 of us," the defiant voice answered. "We all answered advertisements for mail-order brides. He brings us here, keeps us, until the babies are born." Her voice broke. "Then he sells them." Sells them. The words hung in the cold mountain air. This wasn't just kidnapping. This was a farm, a human farm, and the crop was newborn babies. "I'm getting you out," Marcus promised, his voice a low growl. He pulled his knife and started working on the heavy padlock. The metal was cold against his trembling fingers. "Hurry," a voice urged from inside. "He checks on us after his dinner." He focused on the tumblers, the ghost of Rebecca whispering in his ear. "Please come quickly. Time grows short." He had failed her. He would not fail these women. The lock began to give. Just as he felt the final tumbler click, the cabin door slammed open. Marcus flattened himself against the shed wall, his heart hammering against his ribs. Heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel, stopping just feet from his hiding place. A deep voice rumbled through the darkness, laced with a chilling amusement. "Well, well, looks like a wolf's come sniffing around my henhouse." Marcus slowly turned. Jeremiah Hayes stood 20 feet away, a rifle cradled in his massive arms. In the dying light, his face was a landscape of cruelty, but there was something else there too. Something horribly, impossibly familiar. "That's far enough," Hayes said, as Marcus's hand drifted toward his pistol. "Drop the knife." Marcus let it fall. He was outgunned and outmatched. His only chance was to talk. "Just passing through," he said. "Got lost." Hayes chuckled, a low, grating sound. "Folks who are just passing through don't usually try to pick the locks on my property." He stepped closer, the rifle never wavering. He squinted, studying Marcus's face. "You, I know you." His eyes widened in the gloom. A slow, terrible smile spread across his face, a smile that held no warmth, only a predator's delight. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered. "Cole, Dr. Cole, from Gettysburg." The recognition hit Marcus like a physical blow. The beard, the 20 years of hard living, they had hidden it well. But now he saw it. The Confederate lieutenant whose leg he had saved on a field hospital table, while the man's younger brother bled out beside him. "Hayes," Marcus acknowledged, his mind reeling. Jeremiah's smile grew wider, crueler. "I'm flattered you remember me, Doc. Truly." He gestured with the rifle toward the shed. "I see you've met my business partners. Is this what you do now? Save strays?" "This isn't a business, Hayes. It's an abomination." The smile vanished. "You're one to talk about abominations. You remember my brother, don't you, Doc? Lying right there next to me. You patched me up. But him?" He took another step, the rifle barrel now inches from Marcus's chest. "You took one look and walked away. Said his chances weren't good enough. You chose to let him die." "I had to make choices," Marcus said, the old guilt twisting in his gut. "Well, so do I," Hayes snarled. "And right now, I'm choosing to take you inside. You and I have 20 years of catching up to do." As Hayes prodded him toward the cabin, Marcus saw it. A flicker of movement. The shed door, which he'd managed to unlock, was cracked open just an inch. He wasn't facing the devil alone. The hens had escaped the coop, and they were ready for a fight. Inside the cabin, the lamplight revealed a shocking truth. This wasn't the den of a savage. It was the home of a prosperous man. Fine furniture, shelves lined with books, a polished desk. The profits of human misery had bought a great deal of comfort. "Sit," Hayes ordered, gesturing to a chair with his rifle. Marcus sat, his eyes scanning the room, cataloging potential weapons. On the desk, he saw stacks of letters and a thick, leather-bound ledger, the records of the entire monstrous operation. "Tell me, Doc," Hayes said, pouring himself a whiskey. What really brought you to my little piece of heaven? Did your conscience finally catch up with you for leaving my brother to die? Rebecca sent for me, Marcus said, seeing no reason to lie. She was carrying my child. Hayes actually looked surprised. He let out a low whistle. Well now, ain't that a piece of poetry? The woman carrying your baby ends up under my care. The universe does love its little jokes. He took a long swallow of whiskey. She was a fighter, that one. Just like you. Where is she buried? Up on the ridge. Don't worry, I'll let you visit her before I decide how to kill you. Outside, a twig snapped. A tiny sound, but it was enough. Hayes's head jerked toward the window for a fraction of a second. It was the only opening Marcus would get. He exploded from the chair, driving his shoulder into Hayes's gut. The rifle fired, the bullet tearing through the ceiling as they crashed to the floor. Hayes was a bear of a man, his size and brute strength overwhelming. A massive fist caught Marcus on the jaw, sending stars across his vision. That all you got, Doc? Hayes grunted, getting to his feet and reaching for the fallen rifle. But before his fingers could close around it, the cabin door burst open, and all hell broke loose. 4 women stood silhouetted in the doorway. Their clothes were rags, their faces were gaunt, but their eyes burned with a fire that could have melted steel. The tallest one, her belly swollen with child, held a fireplace poker like a queen holding a scepter. A younger one with fiery red hair held a shard of broken glass. Hayes froze, then started to laugh. A booming, arrogant laugh. Well, look what we have here. My little hens thinking they're eagles. He turned his back on Marcus, dismissing him completely. Ladies, go back to your coop before you hurt yourselves. The only one getting hurt tonight is you, the redhead snarled. That's when Marcus saw his chance. While Hayes was focused on the women, Marcus scrambled for the rifle. He had just gotten his hand on the stock when Hayes sensed the movement and spun around. I don't think so, Doc, he growled, lunging. But he was too late. The women surged forward as one. It was a beautiful, terrible chaos. The fire poker slammed into Hayes's back. The shard of glass raked across his arm. Marcus swung the rifle like a club, catching him in the shoulder. Hayes roared, a sound of pure animal fury, and threw them off. He grabbed Marcus by the throat, lifting him off the floor, his massive hands cutting off his air. Should have let me die at Gettysburg, Doc, he rasped, his face inches from Marcus's. Black spots danced in Marcus's vision. The world was going gray. Through the encroaching darkness, he saw her. The youngest of the women, a girl who looked barely 18. She was holding a heavy cast-iron skillet, raising it high above her head with both hands. The sound it made when it connected with the back of Jeremiah Hayes's skull was like a watermelon splitting open on a rock. Hayes's eyes rolled back in his head. His grip went slack, and the giant collapsed, a felled tree crashing to the forest floor. For a long moment, the only sound in the cabin was the ragged, desperate panting of 5 people who had just stared into the abyss and spit in its eye. Is he dead? The young woman with the skillet whispered, her voice trembling. Marcus pushed the unconscious giant off him and felt for a pulse in the thick neck. No, he said, gasping for air. But he'll wish he was. He looked up at the 4 women standing over him, his saviors. Thank you. The tall one nodded curtly. Don't thank us yet. Tie him up, and then we tear this place apart. He's been doing this for years. God only knows what secrets are hidden in these walls. As they bound Hayes with ropes, Marcus learned their names. Catherine, the tall, defiant one, a school teacher from back east. Ruth, the redhead with the glass shard, a farmer's daughter who'd run from an arranged marriage. Anna, the quiet one, a former nurse whose gentle hands belied a core of iron. And Mary, the girl with the skillet, who seemed too young for such horrors. They searched the cabin with a desperate urgency. Under the floorboards, Ruth found a strong box filled with cash and gold coins. Blood money. But it was Marcus at the desk who found the heart of the operation. He opened the leather ledger. It wasn't just a list of names. It was a detailed record of transactions. Names of the women, dates of birth for the babies, and the names of the buyers. His blood ran cold. He recognized some of them. Respected men from across the territory. Merchants. Ranchers. And then he saw it. A recurring name. a signatory on several of the adoption papers, lending them a veneer of legality. The Honorable Judge William Hollister, the senior circuit judge for the entire Wyoming Territory. This wasn't just one man's sick fantasy. This was a conspiracy, a network of powerful men, hiding their monstrous crimes behind badges and gavels. They hadn't just stumbled into the devil's den. They had stumbled into the devil's boardroom. But that wasn't the most chilling discovery. In a small drawer in Hayes's bedroom, tucked away beneath a stack of old letters, Marcus found a small, tarnished silver frame. Inside was a daguerreotype, a photograph from another time. Three men standing in front of a half-built cabin, axes in their hands, pride on their faces. Two of them were young men Marcus had never seen before. But the third man, the tall man standing in the center, a confident smile on his face. Marcus felt the floor drop out from under him. It was his father, Thomas Cole. He turned the photograph over. Scrawled on the back in faded ink were three names and a date: Thomas Cole, Jeremiah Hayes, Samuel Garrett, Wyoming Territory, 1851. The year his father disappeared. The year he left his wife and son with a promise to return. He hadn't just run away. He'd run here, to this place, to these men. The ledger, the judge, the conspiracy. It all faded into the background. This was no longer just about Rebecca. This was about the original sin that had haunted his entire life. The father he thought was a coward might have been something far, far worse. He wasn't just a man who walked away. He was one of the men who built the cage, and Marcus was his son. The chilling thought echoed in the silent cabin. What kind of poison ran in his own veins? The journey down the mountain was a slow, tense affair. Hayes, bound and gagged, was loaded into his own wagon. The strong box of money and the ledger full of secrets were tucked under the seat. Catherine sat beside Marcus, a rifle across her lap, her eyes scanning the dark trees. The other women huddled in the back, a silent, fragile cargo. "You're quiet," Catherine said, her voice low. Marcus didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the treacherous trail, illuminated by the swinging light of a single lantern. "Just thinking." "About your father?" He flinched. He hadn't told them. He hadn't been able to form the words. "How did you know?" "I saw your face when you found that photograph," she said simply. "It was the same look I saw in the mirror every morning for 6 months in that shed. The look of a person whose world has just been burned to the ground." He didn't answer. There was nothing to say. The man he'd spent 20 years resenting, the man whose abandonment had shaped his entire life, was a monster, a founder of this nightmare. The dawn found them resting the horses by a creek. Anna, the former nurse, was pale, wincing with every jolt of the wagon. "How far along are you?" Marcus asked, his old medical instincts taking over. 7 months, maybe," she whispered. "It's hard to keep track." She clutched her stomach. "I've been having pains. Since last night. Premature labor. Out here, miles from a doctor, with a pregnant woman weakened by months of captivity." The situation was spiraling. That's when Catherine saw them. "Riders," she said, her voice sharp. "3 of them. Coming fast." Marcus stood, shielding his eyes. 3 figures on the horizon, kicking up a plume of dust. They weren't riding like friendly travelers. They were riding like a posse. "Get in the wagon," he ordered. "Everyone." He stood his ground, his hand on his pistol, as the riders drew closer. The lead rider was a man in his 50s, wearing a clean suit and a silver badge that glinted in the morning sun. "Morning, folks," the man called out, his voice smooth and authoritative. "Deputy Marshal Wilson, Territorial Authority. We've had reports of some trouble up at the Hayes place." Relief washed over Marcus, so potent it almost buckled his knees. The law. Real help. "We're the ones who reported it," Marcus said, stepping forward. "We have the man who did it, Jeremiah Hayes, tied up in the wagon, and we have evidence. A ledger." Marshal Wilson's smile was wide and friendly, but it never reached his eyes. His eyes were cold, flat stones. "A ledger, you say? Well now, that's important evidence. You should hand it over to me for safekeeping." Something was wrong, terribly wrong. "We'll hold on to it," Marcus said slowly, "until we get to the federal marshal in Cheyenne." The friendly mask slipped. just for a second, but it was enough. The man's face hardened into something cold and predatory. "I'm the law out here, friend," Wilson said, his voice losing its friendly tone. "And I'm not asking." One of his men drew his gun. "The marshal's being polite. We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Ruth let out a bitter laugh from the wagon. "You're with him, aren't you? You're part of it." Marshal Wilson ignored her. He dismounted and walked to the wagon, pulling back the canvas. He looked at the bound and gagged Jeremiah Hayes. He didn't look surprised. He looked annoyed. He ripped the gag from Hayes's mouth. "You incompetent fool," Wilson snarled, his voice a low hiss. "You were supposed to be discreet. You've brought the whole world down on us." Hayes sputtered, his face a mask of confusion. "Wilson, what are you? You're supposed to help me." "The only person I'm helping is myself," Wilson said. He pulled his revolver, the barrel glinting in the sun, and he didn't point it at Marcus. He didn't point it at the women. He pointed it straight at Jeremiah Hayes's head. "Loose ends," Wilson said calmly, "need to be tied up." They hadn't been found by the law. They had been found by the cleanup crew. Wilson wasn't here to save them. He was here to bury them, along with all the evidence. They had escaped one monster, only to be cornered by another, more powerful one who wore a badge. They were trapped. Utterly, hopelessly trapped. But that wasn't the craziest part. The craziest part was the sound of more horses approaching from the direction of Willow Creek. A whole troop of them. And at their head was another man with a badge. A bigger, more official-looking badge. Wilson's face went white. "Brennan," he choked out. "The territorial marshal from Cheyenne. What's he doing here?" The real law had just arrived, and the quiet little creek bed was about to become a war zone. Marshal Brennan was a man carved from granite and frontier justice. He reined in his horse, his weathered eyes taking in the scene in a single sweeping glance. Wilson with his gun on Hayes, Marcus and the women, the wagon full of secrets. "Deputy Wilson," Brennan said, his voice like gravel rolling downhill. "Fancy meeting you here. I've been looking for you. Got an interesting telegram about you from Kansas. Something about missing women and a very profitable, very illegal adoption ring." The game was up. Wilson knew it. His two hired guns knew it. They looked at each other, then at the half-dozen deputies arrayed behind Brennan, and slowly they raised their hands. But Wilson wasn't a man who surrendered. He was a cornered rat. With a snarl, he lunged, grabbing Anna from the wagon and pulling her in front of him. The barrel of his gun pressed to her temple. Anna cried out, a sharp gasp of pain and fear as a contraction seized her. "Nobody moves!" Wilson screamed, his eyes wild. "I ride out of here, or she dies. Her and the baby." The world stopped. A tense standoff. Deputies with their rifles raised. Wilson with his human shield. And Marcus, standing helpless in the middle of it all. "Let her go, Wilson," Brennan said, his voice dangerously calm. "There's no way out." "I'll make a way," Anna cried out again, her face contorted in agony. The baby was coming. Now. Right now. The sound seemed to break a spell. Catherine stepped forward, her hands empty, her voice carrying the calm authority of a schoolteacher addressing a rebellious child. "Marshal Wilson," she said, "think about what you are doing. Harming a woman in childbirth will not help your case." "Stay back," he shrieked, pressing the gun harder against Anna's head. Suddenly Ruth moved. While all eyes were on Wilson and Catherine, she had slipped from the far side of the wagon, creeping around behind the horses with the stealth of a predator. She moved like a ghost. Wilson never saw her coming. She grabbed his gun arm, yanking it down and away from Anna's head. The gun went off, the bullet kicking up dirt harmlessly. In that single moment of chaos, Marcus acted. He drew and fired. The shot was clean. Wilson spun, clutching his shoulder, and dropped like a stone. It was over. Or so he thought. "The baby," Anna gasped, slumping against the side of the wagon. "It's coming. Something's wrong." Marcus rushed to her side. They were miles from town, with no doctor, no supplies, and a woman in premature, complicated labor. He looked at the vast, empty prairie around them, feeling a wave of helplessness wash over him. Then Catherine was beside him, rolling up her sleeves. "I've helped with births before." Ruth was already gathering clean linens from the wagon. Mary was starting a fire to boil water. Marshal Brennan, after securing his prisoners, handed Marcus his flask of whiskey. "For disinfectant," he said, "and to steady your hands." He looked Marcus square in the eye. "You were a doctor, weren't you?" "A long time ago," Marcus said, his hands shaking. "Some things," Brennan said, "you never forget." And as Anna's labor intensified, Marcus found that Brennan was right. His hands remembered what his mind had tried to bury. The delicate touch, the precise movements, the calm voice needed to guide a new life into the world. He was no longer a cowboy, no longer a drifter running from his past. He was a doctor again. The sun began to set, casting the scene in a warm golden light. "One more push, Anna," he urged, his voice steady. "You can do this." With a final, heroic cry, the baby slid into his waiting hands. A girl, tiny, perfect, and terrifyingly silent. She wasn't crying. She wasn't breathing. The world went quiet. The crackle of the fire, the rustle of the wind, the breathing of every person watching, it all faded away. There was only the silent, limp infant in his hands. Memories of battlefield hospitals flooded back, of too many lives lost, of the agonizing silence that follows death. "No," he whispered, "not this one." He cleared her airway, rubbed her back, gently, then firmly. He breathed a small puff of air into her tiny lungs. "Come on, little one," he pleaded. "Breathe for me, please." The seconds stretched into an eternity. Hope, which had blossomed so fiercely just moments before, began to wither. And then a tiny gasp, a cough, and then a cry, a furious, life-affirming wail that echoed across the Wyoming prairie, a sound of defiance against all the darkness in the world. Anna wept with relief as he placed the swaddled baby in her arms. "She's so small," she sobbed. "But she's a fighter," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like her mother." As night fell, they made a strange camp. Federal marshals guarded the captured criminals. The four women huddled together, marveling at the new life they had helped bring into the world. And Marcus sat apart, watching the stars come out, his hands still stained with the blood of birth. Marshal Brennan sat down beside him. "What will she name her?" he asked quietly. Marcus looked over at the wagon, at the tiny bundle in Anna's arms, at the faces of Catherine, Ruth, and Mary illuminated by the firelight. These women who had endured hell now looked at this baby with nothing but love. "Hope," Marcus said. "Her name is Hope." He thought his journey was over. He'd found the women, exposed the criminals, delivered a baby. He thought he could finally rest. But the ledger in the wagon held one more secret, a final, devastating twist that would unravel everything Marcus thought he knew about his past, his father, and the man named Samuel Garrett, whose name was scrawled on the back of that terrible photograph. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun, and the next battle would be for his very soul. 2 days later, Willow Creek was a town transformed. Marshal Brennan's authority had shattered the conspiracy of silence. The town's sheriff was in his own jail cell, along with Deputy Marshal Wilson and a half-dozen other men who had profited from Jeremiah Hayes's operation. The Reverend Jenkins had confessed everything, his kind face crumbling under the weight of his guilt. His wife, Martha, who had given Marcus the map, was hailed as a quiet hero. The women, Catherine, Ruth, Anna, Mary, and baby Hope, were safe in the town's boarding house, treated with a mixture of awe and reverence by the townsfolk who were finally free to speak the truth. But for Marcus, there was no peace. The ledger was a snake pit of names and dates, but the most venomous snake of all was Samuel Garrett. And according to the Reverend, Garrett was the true mastermind. Hayes was just the muscle. Garrett was the brain, a former Confederate officer turned traveling preacher who used his charisma to lure desperate women west with false promises of marriage and a new life. And according to the photograph, Garrett had been his father's partner. That afternoon, Marshal Brennan called them to his temporary office. "We found something," he said, his face grim. He spread a stack of papers on the desk. They were letters taken from Hayes's cabin. Letters from women responding to Garrett's advertisements. Dozens of them. But one letter made Marcus's blood turn to ice. It was dated 1851. The handwriting was his mother's. It was a desperate plea to her absent husband, Thomas Cole. She was sick, out of money, and begging him to come home. It was postmarked from Kansas but had no address. It had never been sent. Tucked inside it was another smaller note, a reply. The handwriting was his father's. Elizabeth, I cannot return. The work I do here is too important. I am creating families, giving children to those who cannot have their own. It is God's work. Samuel has shown me the way. Do not try to contact me again. It was a confession, a damnation. His father hadn't just been a partner. He had been a true believer. He had chosen this evil over his own wife and child. The rage Marcus felt was a physical thing, so powerful it made him dizzy. Where is Garrett now? He asked, his voice a low growl. We have an informant, Brennan said. Says Garrett is holed up in a mining town 30 miles west, a lawless place called Copper Falls. He's heard about Hayes' capture, and he's hiring gunslingers, building an army. An army for what? Catherine asked. To come here, Brennan said, to get his ledger back, and to eliminate all the witnesses. The threat hung in the air, cold and sharp. They weren't safe. Not yet. Then we have to go after him, Ruth said, her eyes blazing. Absolutely not, Brennan countered. You are all witnesses in a federal case. You will stay here under my protection. I've sent for reinforcements from Cheyenne. When they arrive, we will go to Copper Falls and arrest Garrett. And what if he's gone by then? Catherine argued. What if he disappears and starts this all over again somewhere else? That night they gathered in Anna's room. The baby, Hope, slept soundly in a makeshift cradle. The sight of her, so peaceful and innocent, hardened their resolve. Brennan's way is safe, Catherine said, but it's not right. We can't just wait. So what do we do? Mary asked. She had been the quietest, but her sister, Rebecca, had been the first victim they knew of. Her grief was a sharp, palpable thing. We can't fight an army. We don't have to, Marcus said, the plan forming in his mind. We don't go there to fight. We go there to listen. A scouting party. Find out his numbers, his plans. We get the information and get out before Brennan's men even arrive. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was probably stupid. Ruth grinned. I like it. Catherine looked at Marcus, her intelligent eyes searching his. Are you doing this to stop Garrett, or to find answers about your father? Both, he admitted. But one thing I know for sure. I'm not running anymore. The next morning, as the sun crested the mountains, 3 riders left Willow Creek, heading west. Marcus, Catherine, and Ruth. They told Brennan they were going for a ride to clear their heads. It was a lie, and they all knew it. They were riding into the heart of the storm. Marcus felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in 20 years, he wasn't running from his past. He was riding straight at it, with a pistol on his hip and 2 of the strongest women he had ever known by his side. He didn't know if he was riding toward his own death or his salvation, but he knew, with absolute certainty, that he was finally on the right trail, and whatever lay at the end of it, he would face it. For Rebecca, for Hope, and for the father who had chosen darkness over his own son. The reckoning was finally here. Copper Falls was a scar on the face of the earth, a collection of ramshackle buildings clinging to a mountainside, populated by men with hard eyes and calloused hands. The air smelled of cheap whiskey, sweat, and desperation. It was the perfect place for a man like Samuel Garrett to disappear. They rode in looking like what they were pretending to be, a brother and sister, Marcus and Ruth, escorting a widowed schoolteacher, Catherine, to a new life further west. They stabled their horses and made for the largest saloon, the Copper Queen. It was the town's beating heart, and the best place to take its pulse. The saloon was buzzing, even in the middle of the day. Marcus and Ruth took a table in the back, while Catherine, with her refined air, approached the bar to inquire about lodgings. It was a perfect cover. A serving girl with tired eyes and a bruised cheek took their order. Busy today, Marcus said casually. The girl shrugged. New preacher in town, Reverend Garrett, hiring men, paying well. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. He talks about God, but his eyes are full of the devil. Garrett was here, and he wasn't hiding. He was recruiting. Over the next hour, they pieced together the story. Garrett had taken over the top floor of the hotel across the street. He had at least 24 hired guns with him, and more were arriving every day. He was telling everyone he was a rancher hunting a gang of criminals who had stolen from him. Criminals who, he said, were led by 4 dangerous women. The lies were audacious. And in a town like Copper Falls, they were working. They had learned what they needed to know. It was time to leave. But as Marcus stood up to signal Catherine, the saloon doors swung open, and Samuel Garrett walked in. He was exactly as the photograph had hinted, slender, well-dressed, with silver hair, and the gentle, benevolent face of a beloved minister. He moved with a quiet, confident grace. He smiled at the room, and the room seemed to smile back. Then his eyes, those devil's eyes the serving girl had described, swept the room. They passed over Marcus and Ruth, and for a heart-stopping moment, Marcus thought they hadn't been recognized. But then Garrett's gaze settled on Catherine at the bar, and his smile widened. "Friends," Garrett said, his voice carrying through the suddenly quiet saloon. "It seems my prayers have been answered. The lost sheep have wandered right into my flock." The trap snapped shut. The men who had been drinking and laughing a moment before were now on their feet, hands on their guns. They were surrounded. "Catherine," Marcus called, his voice low and urgent. "To me." She moved with a calm grace that defied the danger, joining them at the table. The 3 of them stood together, their backs to the wall. "There's no need for this to be unpleasant," Garrett said, his voice oozing false sincerity. "Just return what was stolen from me, and no one needs to be harmed." "You mean the women you kidnapped and the babies you sold?" Ruth shot back, her voice dripping with venom. Garrett's smile faltered. "Jeremiah always was a clumsy brute. I prefer persuasion." He looked directly at Marcus. "And you must be the doctor, the son of my old friend Thomas." The casual mention of his father sent a jolt through Marcus. "He wasn't your friend." "Oh, but he was," Garrett said, his eyes glinting. "For a time. He was a visionary, until his conscience got the better of him. A fatal affliction. Conscience." He sighed dramatically. "He made his choice, and now you must make yours." He gave a slight nod to his men. It was now or never. Marcus overturned their table, creating a makeshift barricade. "Run!" he yelled, drawing his pistol and firing a shot into the ceiling. The saloon exploded into chaos. Patrons screamed and dove for cover. Ruth had a small pistol of her own out, firing at the nearest gunman. Catherine, unarmed, smashed a whiskey bottle over another man's head. They fought their way toward the back door, a desperate 3-person army against a room full of killers. Bullets splintered the wood around them. They burst out into a back alley, the sounds of pursuit close behind. "The livery!" Marcus shouted, leading them through a maze of trash and crates. But Garrett's men were already there, blocking their path to the horses. They were cut off. "In here!" Catherine yelled, pulling them into a collapsing, abandoned mining office. They were trapped. The shouts of Garrett's men were closing in from all sides. "We need a diversion," Ruth said, breathing hard. "A big one." Her eyes lit up with a dangerous fire. "The general store will have lamp oil and black powder." "You want to build a bomb?" Marcus asked, incredulous. "I grew up on a farm," she said with a grim smile. "Clearing stumps was my specialty." The plan was insane, but it was the only one they had. Catherine, using her schoolteacher's charm, would create a distraction at the front of the store, drawing the guards away. Ruth would slip in the back and get the supplies. Marcus would keep watch. It almost worked. Ruth got the supplies. They regrouped behind the store, and she began assembling her makeshift explosives. 3 of them. 1 for the saloon, to create chaos. 1 for the livery stable, to make them think they were going for the horses, and 1 for the hotel, Garrett's headquarters. "We split up," Ruth said, handing them each a charge. "Set them and meet at the old mine entrance on the hill. It's our only way out of town." Before Marcus could protest, she was gone, a shadow disappearing into the larger shadows of the town. He and Catherine made it to the livery stable. Just as Marcus was about to light the fuse, they were nearly discovered. A massive explosion from the direction of the saloon saved them, drawing the guards away. Ruth's first charge had gone off. They lit their fuse and ran. As they raced through the chaotic streets, a second explosion rocked the town, this time from the hotel. They reached the mine entrance, a dark maw in the side of the hill, and waited, their hearts pounding, their lungs burning. They waited for Ruth. 1 minute passed. 2. 5. She wasn't coming. Just as a cold dread began to settle over Marcus, a figure appeared, running up the hill toward them. It was the young brother of the serving girl from the saloon. "They've got her," he gasped, breathless. "They caught your friend. They're taking her to Garrett." The world crashed down. Ruth was captured in Garrett's hands. The mine offered escape, safety. But Catherine's eyes met his, and in them he saw the same unyielding truth he felt in his own heart. They weren't leaving, not without Ruth. "We're going back," Marcus said. Catherine nodded, her face set like stone. Together, they were no longer just running for their lives. They were a family, and you don't leave family behind. Ever. They turned their backs on freedom and ran back toward the fire, back toward the guns, back toward the monster who held their friend. They were going back into the heart of hell, and this time, they planned on burning it to the ground. The town was a vision of chaos. The saloon and the hotel were blazing, casting a hellish, flickering light over the streets. Garrett's men were everywhere, some fighting the fires, others forming a perimeter around the undamaged part of the hotel. Ruth would be in there. Marcus and Catherine slipped through the pandemonium like ghosts, using the smoke and confusion as cover. They found the back entrance to the hotel, took out the lone guard silently, and crept inside. The sounds of shouting from the upper floors led them. They moved up the service stairs, their pistols ready. On the third floor, they heard it, a muffled cry of pain from behind a closed door. It was Ruth's voice. Just as they were about to storm the room, the door opened. Samuel Garrett stepped out, adjusting his collar. He spoke to the 2 guards left inside. "Be persuasive," he said, "but I need her alive." He walked down the hall away from them and descended the main staircase. Now was their chance. Marcus created a diversion, a clatter of noise at the far end of the hall. One guard came out to investigate. Marcus took him down in the shadows, quick and silent. Then they kicked in the door. The second guard was standing over Ruth, who was tied to a chair, her face bruised but her eyes defiant. He lunged for her, pulling a knife. Marcus fired. The shot was deafening. The guard spun away from Ruth, clutching his shoulder. Catherine was on him in an instant. A single brutal blow with the butt of her pistol, dropping him to the floor. They freed Ruth. "Took you long enough," she croaked, a weak smile on her face. But the gunshot had given them away. Footsteps pounded up the stairs. They were trapped on the third floor. They raced back toward the service stairs, Garrett's men in hot pursuit. They burst into the kitchen on the ground floor, the back door just feet away. Freedom was right there. And then the door swung open. 3 of Garrett's men stood there, guns raised. From the dining room doorway, 2 more appeared. And between them, Samuel Garrett. His suit was still immaculate. His smile was calm, confident, and utterly terrifying. He had them. "Well now," Garrett said smoothly, "it seems our little reunion can finally begin properly." They were surrounded, 5 guns pointed at them. There was no escape. "What do you want, Garrett?" Marcus demanded, positioning himself in front of the women. "Answers," Garrett said. "And the end of my business complications." He looked at Marcus, his eyes holding a strange, almost sad light. "You're so much like him, you know, your father. Don't you talk about him. He was a good man, Thomas, a believer, but he was weak. He wanted to confess, to expose everything, to save 3 women he'd grown fond of. He betrayed me. He betrayed our cause." Garrett's voice grew cold. "I couldn't allow that. The greater good required a sacrifice. So that was it, the final terrible truth. His father wasn't a monster. He had been a man who made a monstrous mistake and then died trying to fix it. He hadn't abandoned Marcus. He had been murdered." "Where is he buried?" Marcus asked, his voice shaking with a rage so profound it was almost calm. "Perhaps we can make a deal," Garrett said. "Your silence for his final resting place." Before Marcus could answer, a new sound cut through the tense standoff. The thunder of hoofbeats, dozens of them. And then a voice amplified by the night, a voice of pure authority. "This is United States Marshal Brennan. Samuel Garrett, you are surrounded. Come out with your hands in the air." Garrett's face, for the first time, showed a crack in its perfect composure. Pure, undiluted shock. "How?" he whispered. "We were the bait," Catherine said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Brennan knew we'd come. He followed us." The hunter had become the hunted, but Garrett was not a man to be caged. "To the cellar!" he snapped at his men. "There's another way out." They were dragged through the hotel, down into a damp cellar, to a hidden tunnel dug into the earth. They crawled through the darkness, emerging into a small shack on the edge of town, well outside the marshal's perimeter. A wagon was waiting. Their last hope of rescue was gone. They were thrown into the back of the wagon, bound and helpless, as Garrett and his men climbed in. The wagon rolled away into the night, leaving the burning town and the federal marshals behind. They were once again Garrett's prisoners, being taken to God knows where, with no hope of escape. The darkness had won. But as they lay there in the rattling wagon, huddled together in the cold, Catherine's bound hand found Marcus's. Ruth pressed her shoulder against his other side. It was a small gesture, a flicker of warmth in an ocean of cold despair. But it was enough. The fight wasn't over. Not as long as they were still breathing. Not as long as they were together. The wagon hit a bump, and from inside Ruth's coat, something small and metal rolled out onto the floorboards. It was a small metal disc, no bigger than a silver dollar. Marcus recognized it. It was a button from a U.S. Marshal's uniform. Brennan hadn't just followed them. He had given them a way to be found, a breadcrumb in the dark woods. And somewhere out there, in the vast Wyoming night, the hounds were still on the trail. The final hunt had begun. The wagon rumbled on through the darkness. Marcus worked at his ropes, the rough fibers digging into his wrists. Minutes felt like hours. Every sound, every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Finally, his hands were free. He whispered to Catherine, "When I move, get Ruth and run." "No," she whispered back fiercely. "Together." Before they could argue, the wagon stopped. Garrett sent one of his men ahead to scout the trail. Then a single gunshot cracked the silence. An ambush. Marshal Brennan's men opened fire from the trees. The night exploded in a symphony of lead and chaos. Garrett's men were caught completely by surprise. In the confusion, Marcus lunged, tackling the nearest gunman out of the wagon. Catherine, her hands also free, wrestled another for his pistol. "Get Ruth out of here!" Marcus yelled, helping the injured woman to her feet. Catherine half-carried Ruth from the wagon and into the cover of the trees. The battle raged around them. Marcus turned back. Garrett was still there, crouched behind the driver's seat, a look of pure fury on his face. This was it. The end of the line. Marcus advanced on the wagon. "It's over, Garrett." The mask of civility was gone. The preacher was gone. All that was left was the monster. "Nothing is over," he shrieked, pulling a tiny derringer from his coat. He aimed it at Marcus's heart. "The cold bloodline ends tonight." A shot rang out, but it wasn't from Garrett's gun. Garrett jerked, a look of surprise on his face. A dark stain spread across his white shirt. He looked down at the wound, then back at Marcus, his eyes full of a strange confusion. "Thomas," he wheezed, slumping to the floor of the wagon. "He said his boy would set things right." And then he was gone. Marcus looked to his left. Marshal Brennan stood there, smoke curling from the barrel of his rifle. "You all right, son?" It was finished. Truly, finally finished. They found his father's grave on the ridge above Hayes' old cabin, just where Garrett had said, an unmarked plot beneath a lightning-split pine. They made a simple wooden cross for him. Thomas Cole, a man who had lost his way, but in the end had tried to find his way back. In the weeks that followed, the full extent of Garrett's network was brought to light. Powerful men fell. The stolen children, scattered across the territories, were slowly, carefully tracked down. The process of healing would be long and painful, but it had begun. And in Willow Creek, something new began to grow from the ashes of the old secrets. Catherine was offered her old job back, and she took it, becoming the town's beloved school teacher. Ruth, with her knowledge of horses, started a livery and training school that quickly became the best in the county. Anna, with baby Hope, decided to stay, her quiet strength a balm for the still healing town. And Mary, in honor of her sister Rebecca, worked alongside them, helping to build a community where women would always be safe. And Marcus? He put away his cowboy gear. He cleaned the 20 years of dust off his old medical bag. Dr. Harrison, the old town doctor, was ready to retire, and Willow Creek needed a new physician. It turned out that being a healer was like riding a horse. You never really forget. One evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Marcus stood with Catherine on the porch of the new schoolhouse. Baby Hope cooed in a nearby cradle. The sounds of the town, happy, busy, alive, drifted up to them on the evening breeze. Catherine slipped her hand into his. It felt as natural as breathing. "So, Dr. Cole," she said, a soft smile on her face, "it seems you found what you were looking for after all." He looked at her, at the incredible woman who had faced down monsters and refused to break. He looked at the town they had all helped save. He looked at the sleeping baby who was the living embodiment of their future. He hadn't found Rebecca or the child he thought was his. He had found something else, something he hadn't even known he was searching for. "No," he said, squeezing her hand. "I found something better." He had found a home. He had found a purpose. He had found a family. And under the vast and peaceful Wyoming sky, he was finally at peace. The ghosts were gone. All that was left was the promise of tomorrow. This story is a testament to the fact that even in the darkest of places, hope can survive. And sometimes, the family you find is the one you were meant to have all along. If you were captivated by this journey of justice and redemption, do the like button a favor and give it a firm handshake. And if you want more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next.